through majestically and kicks the goal. Making something out of nothing.
Malchesty, is that the grand final?
Jimmy Bartell can make a hero of himself.
That is a brilliant snap. He's kicked the goal and Freeman to win it after the siren. What a game of football at the MCG.
Welcome to the Protected Zone. Another week, another episode, another highlight in this magnificent AFL 2018 season. The best season, in my opinion, since 1897. This week, we review a not-so-gripping round 4.
Freedom of speech in sport. We look at Israel Folau and his nasty comments.
Babyface Bolton. Is he a coach facing the chop?
AFL in the year 2057. Will it be played on another planet or still at the MCG?
And we preview the very long round 5 coming up. I'm Eddie J in Sydney.
And I'm Linton Denham. Actually, I'm at the back of this shop facing the main street of Padam. So you may hear in the background motorcycle noise and people trying to buy something. And hello, sir. Yes, goodbye.
Well, as long as you don't get a truck reversing into the back of you like you almost did last week.
Yes. I have to be really careful.
So round 4, it was a little bit exciting. We had probably too many blowouts as far as I'm concerned, but Friday night we had a fantastic game. We had hot pies for the second week in a row where Collingwood defeated the highly fancied Adelaide on their home turf, quite easily as it turned out.
Yes, something like 6 games that was a substandard. Oh no, three games were really bad. Yes, that Friday we seem to have forgotten the game started the round. And hot pies, yes indeed. I think the main player we should talk about is Brodie Grundy, the graffiti man.
Well, I'd say that he's officially a star now. Would you agree with me?
Oh yes, he's, I think, as they say, AA form. He had something like 40 hit-outs. On top of that, he had 29 disposals. So it's like ruckman and midfielder in one person. Any team would like to have a player like that, wouldn't you?
He was almost like 3 extra players on the ground. So he also kicked a running goal, and that was one of the goals of the season. But you're right, he's probably in all-Australian form at the moment. And also, Collingwood had another young player who's barely out of his nappies, and he kicked 5 goals.
Yes, that is a strength of hot pies. They don't seem to rely on any one player or 2 players. A different week sees the different heroes, and this week it was Jaden Stevenson. As you said, he was just, a first-year player, and he was nominated for the Rising Star Award. And he was so composed, and he was so quick.
Yes, well, for such a young player, it's good to see a young'un like that. As I mentioned, he's just out of nappies, Jaden Stevenson. He kicked 5 goals, so it's starting to look pretty good for Collingwood. And after that game, and they really gave the Adelaide Crows a good thrashing as far as I can see, but a lot of the commentators kept on remarking that Collingwood stuck to their game plan, and now they've got a very good game plan as long as they stick to it. What does that actually mean?
Well, I think the game plan is that, Nathan Buckley being the midfield background, so he made up all the team full of midfielders, and he seems to be rotating, midfielders in the forward line, side bottom, the Stevenson, Josh Thomas. They're all capable of playing midfield. Opposition teams are having a difficulty matching up. Collingwood's not having sort of forward players. They're just rotating, and other teams' oppositions seem to be mesmerised. Who are we supposed to defend?
Well, that is a very good question. A few weeks ago we talked about the power forward, but I think Collingwood, they've changed that whole situation where they do have a power forward every week, but it's just that it's not the same player. They have a different player as a power forward each week.
Exactly, and the opposition's having difficulty matching them up.
Last week we talked about Essendon just losing the plot and not being interested, but they got redemption this weekend against Port Adelaide.
Yes, it was not a bad game. The Bombers were looking like they were running away, but power came back, and in the final quarter they kicked 3 or 4 goals straight until Joe Danaher kicked the sort of steadier. It could have been Power overtaking it, but Essendon hang on to the lead and won the game, and it was a gutsy win. We talked about the coach, John Worsfold, has to think about putting Cale Hooker back into where he belongs, which is a back line, and that worked. And also their recruit, Jake Stringer, who kicked how many goals?
He kicked 4 goals.
Yes, he was more, in his elements. He looked very a forward player. Some of the goals he kicked were just fantastic.
And last week we did talk about Port Adelaide being the real deal for this year. Last year they were the flat track bully, but maybe we were a bit premature about our decision there. I think Port Adelaide might be the big pretenders this year.
Yes, unfortunately for the Adelaide people, both Adelaide teams we highly rate. And they seem to be struggling. And Power, even though they started the season very well, they seem to be a bit lacking. I think the main problem they have is Ruckman. They relied on Paddy Ryder, but he's not available. And they were using makeshift ruckman, and against the weaker opposition, that's okay. Yeah, against Essendon, they were exposed.
Fortunately for them, Paddy Ryder will be coming back in a few weeks' time, but next week could be a different world. So we'll give Port Adelaide another chance and see what happens. But speaking of what happened to Port Adelaide, what happened to Melbourne? They were totally thrashed by Hawthorn. And I watched most of this game, and Melbourne scored 4 goals in the first 15 minutes of the game, and then only 2 more in the final 105 minutes. How does this happen in AFL?
Yes, indeed. There are a few games like that. You keep wondering, hang on, why can't they kick goals? And it is one of the games, and Hawthorn was so dominating. Well-oiled machine, it looked like.
Well, I'd take it one step further. I would say that they were clinical.
Yes.
Speaking of not many goals being scored, on the Saturday we had Brisbane and Carlton playing different games, scoring only 6 goals between them, and that's an average of 1.33 goals per quarter. And Brisbane, they only scored 2 goals and 5 behinds, and on a pretty much a mainly sunny day. How can a team play for 2 hours and score only 2 goals? It's not soccer that we're playing.
Yes, someone might have told them that it's a soccer game and that they played like a soccer game. It was one of the disappointing games of the round. Brisbane, only the week before they played very well against Port Adelaide Power. Everyone thought, yes, Brisbane, even though they're still winless. They had signs of improvement, their enthusiasm and their very young side. Dane Beam's coming back, and with Zorko and Hodge, we thought do a few encouraged things, but the game against Richmond was so methodically brutal, and Dustin Martin kicking 6 goals. They're just all over the place.
Yeah, so we did talk about the amount of blowouts that we did have in this round, so much for our even season. But we only had one very close game, and that was the one between the Sydney Swans and the Western Bulldogs.
Oh, that was a thriller, wasn't it? About 45 seconds to go or something, and there was only 1 point in it. Yes, it was a classic, but Bulldogs have got only themselves to blame. After the game, their coach, Luke Beveridge, said could have, would have, should have, but they didn't. Yes, they were competitive throughout the game, probably more dominating. Again, the difference was Lance Franklin, I thought. He kicked 3 goals in the match, and he became the 9th most prolific goal kicker of the whole history of AFL.
Yes, and that's a very impressive achievement. I actually looked at Lance Franklin's record, and I realised that he's played 275 games. He's a veteran.
Yes, he's a veteran, and he's soon to be a 300 gamer, and he's still got 5-6 years on his contract, so he's going to play 400 games at this rate, and he may become 3rd or 4th most prolific goal kickers of all time when he finally decides to hang up the boots.
Well, I suspect that he'll be playing until he's about 45, and he'll be an inspiration to all of us older folk that are keen to return to the game. So thumbs up to Lance Franklin and on a great career, and he's still winning the games for the Sydney Swans.
You know, a lot of people question that if it was a good investment, and so far I think, the Swans' investment has been paid a dividend. I mean, they haven't actually won the flag since Franklin joined. His influence on the ground is just phenomenal.
You're listening to The Protected Zone. You can subscribe to us at iTunes, listen to us on SoundCloud, YouTube, Tumblr and iHeartRadio. And if that's all too confusing, you can go to our website, theprotectedzone.com. Up next, an even season, coaches under the pump, the future of the AFL Grand Final, and we ask, is he a bigot? We have a situation where all teams have been defeated, and this is the first time that this has happened since 1994, the most even season on record. Will this happen again? The results are a little bit one-sided so far, but the ladder is even. What's going on, Lin Tang?
Yes, before we go on any further, who won the premiership in 1994?
That would have been the West Coast Eagles.
So history might repeat and West Coast may be still standing.
They could be still standing, and it was a very even season. 1993 was also a very even season as well, so there were two consecutive even seasons. 1993 premiers were Essendon and 1994 premiers were West Coast Eagles. So we could see history repeating itself.
So if you look at the ladder at the moment, there are no clear sort of standout teams. And only the three teams or four teams at the bottom, they were standing out. And they seem to be sort of playing their own kind of leagues. And but still they've got chance. They're only, a couple of games or one game away from the top 8. So, even Brisbane, Carlton, Gold Coast, St Kilda, they might have a chance. And today's winner can be tomorrow's loser.
And today's loser can be tomorrow's winner as well.
Exactly. Not many teams have won 2 games in a row. Power won 3 in a row, but they are defeated now. And their sort of credential is seriously questioned.
So I was thinking about why, even though we've only had 4 rounds so far, why the ladder is so even and why we've got every team has been defeated so far. So I'm just wondering why this is happening. Is it because of the AFL socialist equalisation policy? Something else going on there? Is it to do with the lining up with the planets? Is the weather? What else is going on there?
I think the planet's been playing a big part. Some scientists predict this year we'll have more earthquakes than we have seen in the past. The Earth is definitely shaky ground. So that's the playing surface we are talking about, the fundamental. Another big influence is the umpires. We have talked about that the league didn't introduce any new rules this year, and that's having a kind of steadying effect. No team has done sort of early homework, that kind of advantage. Every team is playing like it was last year. They're playing the same rules for the first time in many, many months. So that's having, effect. That's the second one. The third one is all those young players are coming up really nicely. They're more than any other years, I think. So that's the sort of steadying effect and the levelling effect, so to speak.
And I think it's a good result for football overall, because if you've got 18 teams that have all got a possibility of reaching the finals, that's fantastic. I know that we've talked about 3 teams, Carlton, Brisbane and Gold Coast, probably not being up to scratch, but things can turn around fairly quickly in this game. And who knows, if they win a couple of games, in the next few rounds, there'll still be a chance of getting into the finals. And that's great for the game and it's great for the fans.
Indeed, if they discovered how to kick goals, that is.
That's right. One thing that we like to do in the AFL protected zone is to look at coaches under the pump. And there's one coach that we haven't really focused upon, and that's Brendan Bolton. He's in his third season as coach of Carlton. And I think that he should be under a lot more serious scrutiny than he has been. He's actually never played an AFL game. He's got the boy smiley face, but can he coach? He's only won 13 out of the 46 games that he's coached in, and that's not good enough. Do you think that he's the right coach for Carlton?
Well, short answer is yes. Carlton has got to be a losing culture, and losing culture needs a losing coach. So in that sense, yes, it's fitting. Their AFLW team's not doing well, probably netball team's not doing well. I think it's a whole culture thing. Carlton, so in that sense, yes, Brendan Bolton, who previously coached soccer team, or how did he get a job?
Well, he previously was the assistant coach at Hawthorn under Alistair Clarkson, and while Alistair Clarkson was sick with a serious illness for 5 weeks, Brendan Bolton stepped in and filled the breach. So he coached for 5 games and he won every single one of them. That probably propelled him into the spotlight for a little bit. He had an undefeated coaching record before he started at Carlton. That's why he got the gig. But I'm just starting to question whether he's... I know that I asked the question, is he the right coach for Carlton? And you said, yes, he is, because they've got a losing culture. But if they want to lose that losing culture, is he the right coach for Carlton?
Well, it's a difficult question. They need to change a whole culture, mindset. They experimented earlier with the winning coach. They lured Mick Malthouse from retirement and tried to instill that winning culture. He didn't manage to do that, and so the losing culture stuck. And they need something from top to bottom. Whole replacement, not just a coach. I think they've got a bigger problem than Brendan Bolton.
It's a strange situation, but I take your point about Carlton having a losing culture, and I think that they should start small, like have card tournaments and chess tournaments, like easy games that they can build up that winning culture, and dart competitions or pool table competitions. So they start off small and then they can build up to the big things like winning an AFL game.
Indeed, or they could start a pub and a drinking contest. No, that's not the right thing to do. Yes, they need to instill winning culture.
Big news for the week has been that the Grand Final is to be played at the MCG until the year 2057. The AFL signed the contract with the MCG this week. Does that mean that we'll hear whinging from the interstate teams for the next 40 years?
Yes, indeed. 2057. I will be far too old to be watching the game by then, but probably there will be some international teams competing in 4 decades, probably from China, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, probably Indonesia, West Sumatra, Tigers, that kind of thing. Richmond couldn't keep their Tigers there, and they might have relocated to West Sumatra, Padang by then, that kind of thing. So interstate teams, not just interstate teams, but international teams will be complaining. And MCG will be too old to hold a game by that time. Don't you reckon?
I think it might be. It might be quite dilapidated by that time. In response to this new contract being signed, there was also talk of the Grand Final or the Premiers being decided as the best of 3 games. So they're ripping off this idea from basketball, but where would it all end? why not have the best of 22 games? But, wait a minute, we've already got that with the home and away season. So I think we should just keep it to one game, don't you, Lintang?
Oh, I completely agree. How do you have a best of 3 games stretched over, a whole month or something?
Well, the idea would be there would be the best of 3 games. First game at the MCG, then the second game at the home stadium of the interstate team, if there happens to be an interstate team there. And then if there isn't a clear winner there, so if there's still the 2 teams locked at 1 game each, then they have a third game played at the MCG as well. So I think it would be a little bit ridiculous.
It is indeed. Imagine if it is, series or grand final series between Fremantle and Gold Coast.
So we'd have a home game for Fremantle, then a home game for Gold Coast, and then 1 game at the MCG.
Well, yeah, that sounds ridiculous. We just have 1 game at the end of, on the final Saturday of September. That's a sacred day for the football.
One other issue that came up during the week, and it's not strictly related to AFL, but we had a former Greater Western Sydney player who was making the news over his intolerance to homosexuality. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I didn't normally pay too much attention to the, former football player, in this case, Israel Folau. He's apparently made a comment last week on Instagram. He said gay people needed to repent of their sins and turn to God, or they would go to hell. Isn't that a strong comment?
Well, it's a very strong comment, and for those of you that are listening and don't know who Israel Folau is, he's the top-line Rugby Union player, and he used to play rugby league for Brisbane, and in between, he also used to play for Greater Western Sydney. He played there for 2 seasons, and so he made his comment on Instagram, and there was quite an outrage about it. And he's a high-profile player for rugby league, and the rugby league administration decided to not do very much about it. They just said, well, it's a freedom of speech issue. What would have happened if he made that comment while he was still playing in the AFL?
I think it's a very different environment. I'm amazed that players of that sort of profile, feel okay to make that comment. There's something wrong with the culture. We talked about Carlton's losing culture, but some codes of football, people think it's the freedom of speech, but it's like saying that some people should go to hell, that kind of thing. It's just
it's a very strange comment for him to make, but he is a Mormon Christian. But what if he changed it to add a little bit of a racial flavour there? So say if he said that all Japanese people should go to hell, or all Croatian people should go to hell, I think he'd be rightly banned.
Or not just banned, but the cultural environment of our footy don't allow that sort of comment to be aired, because everyone thinks it's just so stupid.
If Israel Folau had have made the comment while he was playing AFL, he probably would have been sacked immediately. The issue there is that he wasn't a very good AFL player. He virtually made no impact, and he probably would have been dumped if that happened in the AFL. But what if it was a different AFL player? So if it was the reigning Brownlow medalist, or the Brownlow medalist from a couple of years ago, and they made this comment, would the AFL sack them even if they were a high-profile player?
I think to start, there's a less likely that any players or former players would make that sort of comment, because our football is more inclusive and not just racial inclusiveness, but also sexuality. We have a successful women's league, and we want to involve everyone, not discriminate. We don't want to tell people to go to hell.
No, well, I'll never be watching a rugby union match ever again. You're listening to The Protected Zone. You can subscribe to us at iTunes, listen to us on SoundCloud, YouTube, Tumblr and iHeartRadio. And if that's all too confusing, go to our website, theprotectedzone.com. Up next, we preview an exciting and mouth-watering Round 5. There are two games on in round 5 that we predicted would be the grand finals this year. So obviously we're not having two grand finals unless we're talking about AFLX, but I predicted that it would be a Sydney versus Adelaide grand final, and you predicted that it would be Collingwood versus Essendon. Are either of these matches still a possibility?
Yes, very likely. Maybe Adelaide is a bit fading after the last week's failure. They will come out and play with the guts this week against Swans. Yeah, one of the problems that they seem to have had last week was they went in with a very, very tall forward line, and Collingwood exploited that. And if they go into this match against Sydney with a similar sort of game plan or strategy, they will be exploited again.
Sydney and Adelaide are playing on Friday night, so they kick off round 5, and that's being played at the SCG. So it's very tough for visiting teams to defeat Sydney at their home ground, the Sydney Cricket Ground. And I think that Adelaide are a different team to last year. They've lost a couple of players to either injury or through the trade period, and something's not quite right for them this year.
Yes, I do agree, and that showed their ladder position. They're currently at number 9, and their midfield is still there, but they are missing Crouch brothers. They just don't seem to have sort of players to cover those missing players as well as lost players.
Well, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here when I predict that Sydney will win, so Sydney will win this game.
I think Sydney's too good, and major difference is Lance Franklin.
The other big match of the round, and it's actually quite a bit of a distance from Friday night. It's actually being played next Wednesday, and it's the Anzac Day clash between Collingwood and Essendon. And I think we'll get probably 100,000 people turning up on Anzac Day.
Yes, and this is the year that both teams, Collingwood and Essendon, are coming into this contest with a gutsy win. Both of them seems to be in good form, so it's going to be a good contest.
Well, if we had have had this match 3 weeks ago, I would have predicted neither of these teams to win the game, but as I mentioned before, this is going to be a mouth-watering round, and my mouth is starting to water from the prospect of watching this game. It's going to be a tough one to predict, but based on what we've seen over the past 2 weeks from Collingwood, I think that Collingwood have got the edge.
I do agree. Best day, Essendon, can beat anyone, including Collingwood, but they're a bit inconsistent. Not saying that Collingwood's consistent, but they won 2 games, 2 in a row, and the way they won was also impressive. As we talked about, they have different heroes in those 2 weeks, and there seem to be more coming up. And the one other thing we should note is that their midfield rotation, not just rotating forward and midfield, but midfielders, players like Sidebottom and Pendlebury, they're also playing Tagger's role, and it's just incredible. They're versatile. I think Nathan Buckley is very proud of his team at the moment. I'll go for Collingwood.
Well, I think that Nathan Buckley is incredibly proud of his team, so I'll go for Collingwood as well. So they're the two big matches of the round, but on the protected zone, we like to look at the lesser matches, and we're looking at not the match of the round, which is the Q clash. It's Brisbane versus Gold Coast. Do you think that Brisbane will be able to score more than 2 goals in this game?
If they do, they might have a sniff of a chance. Yes, it's a good chance for them to redeem themselves and along the way, win their first game of the season.
Based on last weekend, where they only scored 2 goals for an entire game, you wouldn't think that they'd be able to win a game for the rest of the year. But I'm casting my mind back a further week in that game against Port Adelaide, which they only lost by 5 points, and they can be well organised. So maybe last week was just their worst performance of the year. It happens to the best of teams. So I even think that Brisbane might come back this weekend and kick 2 goals in the first 2 minutes of the game and redeem themselves completely.
I do agree, and the Suns will have a bit of a travel fatigue. They spend 10 days or 2 weeks in the West Coast, and coming back from West Coast is not easy.
No, it's not easy. So I'm going for the Brisbane Lions.
I'm going for the Lions too.
We've got our quick tips for all of the other games. On Saturday at the Docklands, we've got St Kilda playing Greater Western Sydney. What sort of fireworks can we expect to see here?
Great Western Sydney will just totally steamroll the hapless Saints. Can't go marching anywhere.
No, they're not doing so well. Somebody actually suggested during the week that St Kilda is just a cursed team. Something happened to them a long, long time ago. They stepped under a ladder or walked past too many black cats or something like that. So something's happened in their history that is cursed, and unless they change their colours or change their name or change something, things are going to be continuing along this path.
Well, whatever the reason, they might have to wait until 2057 to win the other flag.
Well, Greater Western Sydney will win this game, as far as I can see. There's another game being played at the MCG on Saturday, and it's Carlton against West Coast.
Yes, that's an easy one. I would go for West Coast, even though they don't travel very well, but against Carlton, a team with the losing culture, losing coach, losing players. West Coast haven't got no reason to lose this one.
Yes, West Coast for me as well. Saturday evening, there's a game between Port Adelaide and Geelong, and it's being played at Port Adelaide. I think that Port Adelaide will seek their redemption after their shocking loss against Essendon last weekend.
Yes, Port will come out. Remember, they've got a lot to prove, and even though Cats are not at their top form, I think Cats will be steadier, so I'll go for the Cats.
Fremantle against Western Bulldogs. This game, it's a big one, it's being played at the Perth Stadium. Hasn't quite developed into a house of pain for interstate teams. What could we expect to see in this game?
Well, the Doggies would have. The Fremantle, yes, they would like to build up their fortress, their draw.
Oh, you're going for a draw. You're right, the Western Bulldogs, they could have, should have last weekend, but they didn't. I think this weekend they might be able to do it. I'm predicting that Western Bulldogs will win this game. Another match on Sunday, and it's North Melbourne against Hawthorn. This is a replay of the 1976 Grand Final. Can you believe it?
Whoa, and who won that one?
Hawthorn.
Maybe the history may repeat again this Sunday. Even though North had a pretty good win, Hawthorn's demolition of Melbourne, I think we rated very high. The way Hawthorn methodically, clinically demolished Melbourne, that was just awesome.
Yes, it's hard to read North Melbourne at the moment because they did demolish Carlton last weekend, but it was only Carlton. Whereas Hawthorn, as you mentioned, completely demolished Melbourne. Melbourne are actually a pretty good team, so comparatively speaking, Hawthorn should be able to give North Melbourne a caning, but the season's still working itself out, but I'll still go for Hawthorn to win this game.
Hawthorn for me.
And the final game that we'll look at, it's actually being played on Tuesday night, and it's rare to have an AFL game played on Tuesday night, but it's the Anzac Eve game between Melbourne and Richmond, and it's become a little bit of a tradition.
Is it? I was about to question what's this Anzac Eve business.
It's a little bit of a marketing process as well, but something new, something different. Melbourne and Richmond. I think it's the second time that they'll be doing the Anzac Eve match. So it's not so much a tradition yet, because I think a tradition needs to probably be set up maybe over at least 10 years or 15 years. People talk about the Collingwood Essendon Anzac Day game as a traditional game, but that's only been around since 1994.
Yes, and that game, I think it was the second year, the draw that really set up the legend. Didn't St Kilda and Sydney try to set up another Anzac Day match played in New Zealand or something a few years back?
Yes, they did. They tried to snatch that tradition, but it didn't quite work. That was just a one-off, and you can't have a traditional game just after one match. In this game, Melbourne will be looking for their redemption, and Richmond don't have anything to prove because they're the reigning premiers and they've only lost one game this year. It's going to be a tight one, I believe. I think that Melbourne will be seeking their redemption from last week, and they might nudge Richmond just by a couple of points, I'd say.
Yes, I think it's about time Tigers will lose a bit of a game or two here and there. It's Dima's sort of way of managing the long season, even season. Yes, I do agree. It's Melbourne. They're showing a bit of spirit on Anzac Day Eve. Yeah, Max Gorm may kick a few goals instead of a few behinds. Yeah, Melbourne will be a winner.
So there's all of our tips for this week, for round 5. You're listening to The Protected Zone. You can subscribe to us at iTunes. You can find us on SoundCloud, YouTube, Tumblr and iHeartRadio. And you can also go to our website, theprotectedzone.com. Up next, we have our Song of the Week. Song of the Week, Lin Tang. What's been the theme for you over the past week?
Well, you talked about redemption everywhere. There has been a lot of redemption recently. Collingwood and Bulldogs, hot pies and hot dogs last week. And it was Essendon this week. So it's the spirit of the season so far. Yesterday's losers can be today's winners. Today's winners can be tomorrow's losers.
But I think it's actually gone past the past week. There's been quite a lot of redemption over the past month. I think the whole season's been filled with redemption. But which team will be redeemed next? Could it be St Kilda or Port Power or another team?
Yes, you talked about the St Kilda being cursed team. Now they may come out winning a few more games and all of a sudden everyone's joining a bandwagon and forgetting what happened in the month of April.
So for all of those teams that are seeking redemption, we've chosen the Redemption Song. It's a song that was written by Bob Marley in 1979, and he tells listeners to emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Will this be an inspiration for some of these teams that are seeking redemption, Lin Tang?
Yes, I think so. I think Nathan Buckley might have played that song to the players before the game, and Alan Richardson should get a copy from Nathan Buckley and play it to the St Kilda Saints players.
Well, maybe his MP3 player isn't working so well, but yeah, definitely get a copy of Redemption Song from Nathan Buckley, from Luke Beveridge as well. Play it as many times as possible. Get it from John Worsfold. These are all the teams that have been seeking redemption, and they actually got it. But it's a very good song, Redemption Song. It's actually been covered quite a few times. Eddie Vedder, Beyonce, Jackson Browne. But we think that the best version, aside from the original by Bob Marley, is the version by Johnny Cash and Joe Strummer. And it's the last song that Joe Strummer recorded. So let's go out with the Redemption Song sung by Joe Strummer and Johnny Cash.
Yes, and goodbye from Linton and Am from Padan.
Have a good week and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Old pirates, yes they rob I, sold I to the merchant ship. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. we forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We got to fulfill the book. So won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Old pirates, yes they rob I, sold I to the merchant ships.